Easter Island, known to its native people as Rapa Nui, is a tiny speck in the southeastern Pacific, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, a volcanic triangle of rock and soil. This isolation is central to its story. The island is world famous for its monumental stone statues, the Moai, which stand as silent witnesses to a complex and creative society. For centuries, this society thrived, developing a unique culture and undertaking remarkable engineering feats. But something profound happened, leading to a dramatic transformation of its environment and its society. The story of Rapa Nui is often presented as a simple tale of self-inflicted ecological disaster. However, the real story is more complex and nuanced. It is not a story of a single, sudden catastrophe, but a slow, unfolding process driven by a combination of factors. To truly understand what happened, we must set aside dramatic myths and instead follow the evidence. This requires us to look deep into the island's soil, to analyze ancient pollen grains, to study the bones of animals, and to carefully date the remnants of human activity. By following the evidence, we can build a clearer, more accurate picture of the island's past. The central question: how could a society capable of carving and transporting massive statues seemingly falter? The Moai represent a huge investment of labor, resources, and social organization. Their existence points to a period of stability and surplus. The subsequent decline, cessation of statue carving, and evidence of social stress suggests the foundations of this society were eroded over time. To understand the story of Rapa Nui's transformation, we must first picture the island as it was before human arrival. It was not the barren, grassy landscape we see today. Scientific evidence, primarily from the analysis of ancient pollen preserved in lakebed sediments, paints a picture of a subtropical paradise. The island was covered in a dense woodland. It was dominated by a species of giant palm, now extinct. That palm was related to the modern Chilean wine palm. This palm would have provided tall, straight, sturdy timber. It supplied edible nuts, and it yielded sap. The forest understory was rich with other trees, shrubs, and ferns, creating a diverse, resilient ecosystem. The first people to reach this isolated shore were intrepid Polynesian voyagers. For a long time, the exact date of arrival was debated, with some estimates as early as 400 CE. More recent, precise radiocarbon dating of the earliest sites pushed that timeline forward. The current consensus suggests the first canoes landed around 1200 CE. These settlers brought crops like taro, yams, sweet potatoes. They brought domesticated chickens. And unintentionally, the Polynesian rat, which stowed away on voyages. Upon arrival, the settlers found an island teeming with life. The forests were home to numerous land birds, many now extinct. The surrounding waters were rich with fish and shellfish. Rocky coastlines provided nesting grounds for vast colonies of seabirds. For the first few centuries, life was good. People cleared small areas of forest to plant their gardens. They built homes and began to establish a new society on their isolated home. The population grew, supported by abundant natural resources and successful cultivation. This became the foundation for the unique Rapa Nui culture, including Moai carving. The initial period was one of successful adaptation. The most dramatic environmental change on Rapa Nui was the almost complete deforestation of the island. The lush palm forests that greeted the first settlers disappeared over the course of a few centuries. We know this did not happen overnight, but was a gradual process we can now track with remarkable precision. The primary evidence comes from paleoecology, the study of past ecosystems. Scientists drill core samples from sediments at the bottom of the island's crater lakes. These sediments build up in layers over thousands of years, creating a natural archive. Each layer traps pollen grains from the plants that grew at that time. By analyzing these pollen cores, we reconstruct the island's vegetation history. In the deepest layers, before human arrival, palm and other woody pollen is abundant. After about 1200 CE, the pollen signature changes dramatically. Palm pollen begins a steady decline. Grasses and ferns increase. By about 1650 CE, palm pollen has all but vanished from the record. This pollen data is a clear biological record of deforestation. Complementing pollen is the study of charcoal. Archaeological soils across the island contain charcoal fragments, remnants of ancient fires. Identifying the burned wood shows which trees were cut and used for fuel. Radiocarbon dating of the charcoal builds a timeline for the burning. The dates match the pollen record, extensive burning of native palm and other trees. This confirms humans actively cleared the forest, likely for reasons including agriculture, fuel for cooking, and timber for construction. The giant palm provided the best wood for building large canoes, essential for deep-sea fishing for species like tuna and dolphin. It also supplied timber for constructing houses and critically for transporting the massive Moai statues. As trees became scarcer, the Rapa Nui had to find alternatives, but nothing fully replaced large palm trunks. The disappearance of the forest marked a turning point, setting the stage for cascading challenges. While human activity was the primary driver of deforestation on Rapa Nui, it was not the only factor. The settlers had brought with them an unwitting accomplice, the Polynesian rat, Rattus exulans. They arrived as stowaways on the first canoes. They found an island with no natural predators. They found an island with an abundant food source. Their population exploded, reaching numbers hard to imagine today. Excavations across the island unearthed vast quantities of rat bones. Those bones show rats were everywhere and in enormous numbers. The key to the rats' destructive impact lay in their diet. They fed on seeds. They fed on nuts. They targeted the native giant palm. In a healthy forest, trees produce enough seeds to regenerate, even with some seed loss. But on Rapa Nui, two pressures combined to be fatal for the forest. Humans were cutting down mature seed-producing trees. Rats were consuming seeds. Rats were gnawing saplings on the forest floor. That prevented new trees from growing. The evidence for the rats' role is compelling. Archaeologists have found numerous palm nuts with telltale rat gnaw marks. Those gnawed nuts are a smoking gun. Direct proof rats ate the seeds in large quantities. The timing aligns. Rat bone spikes in dated soil layers. And the pollen record shows a dramatic palm forest decline at the same time. It was a synergistic disaster. More clearing, more open habitat for rats, harder forest recovery. This human-invasive species interaction is central to the Rapa Nui story. The most iconic feature of Rapa Nui is the Moai, colossal monolithic statues carved from volcanic tuff. Over 900 were created, representing immense time, vast labor, and scarce resources. The carving process, the transport of these giants, were central to Rapa Nui's social and religious life. They testify to ingenuity and organization, but their creation strained the island's limited forests. Some statues weighed over 80 tons and had to be moved many kilometers from the quarry at Rano Raraku to coastal Ahu. The leading theory says large amounts of timber were used. Experiments and traditions show two main methods: placed on wooden sleds and rolled on log rollers, or walked upright with ropes and levers. Both needed wooden tracks and gear. The demand for straight, strong palm logs would have been immense. A cultural drive for ever larger Moai likely accelerated deforestation. Rival groups commissioned bigger, more elaborate statues, fueling a competitive cycle and heavier resource use. It required wood for transport and a large workforce that had to be fed, pressuring farms and fisheries. Society could sustain this for a while, but as forests dwindled, maintenance became harder. Production slowed and then stopped abruptly. At Rano Raraku, dozens of Moai lie unfinished. Some remain attached to bedrock, others abandoned on transport roads. This halt, around 1600 CE, coincides with late-stage deforestation. The loss of the forest was not an isolated event. It triggered a cascade of negative consequences that rippled through every aspect of life on Rapa Nui. One of the most severe impacts was on the island's soil. Tree roots help to hold soil in place. The forest canopy protects the ground from the full force of wind and rain. Once the trees were gone, the island's thin volcanic soils were exposed to the elements. Strong winds and seasonal rains began to strip away the fertile topsoil. This process is known as soil erosion. That made agriculture increasingly difficult. Evidence for this erosion is found in the island's soil profiles. Scientists can see thick layers of eroded sediment washed down from the slopes and deposited in the lowlands. The chemical composition of the remaining soils shows a depletion of essential nutrients. That would have led to a decline in crop yields over time. The Rapa Nui people were skilled farmers who developed ingenious techniques to cope. They built stone-walled gardens called manavai to protect plants. They used a technique called lithic mulching, scattering rocks across fields. The rocks helped retain moisture and reduce temperature fluctuations. These innovations show resilience, but they could not fully reverse the damage. The disappearance of the forest led to the extinction of most of the island's native land birds. The lack of large timber meant the islanders could no longer build large, sturdy canoes for deep-sea fishing. Archaeological analysis of ancient middens confirms this shift. In earlier layers, the bones of deep-sea fish like tuna and dolphin are common. In later layers, these disappear, replaced by smaller inshore fish and more shellfish. This growing scarcity of resources would have placed immense pressure on the population. The island's carrying capacity began to decline, and a daily struggle for survival took hold. As environmental conditions worsened and resources became scarcer, the social and political structure of Rapa Nui began to break down. The period following the halt of Moai construction, from roughly 1650 CE onwards, shows increasing signs of social stress and conflict. The cooperative system that had enabled the creation of the monuments gave way to competition and warfare between clans. The archaeological evidence for this shift is clear and comes from multiple sources. One of the most prominent signs is the appearance of a new type of weapon, mata'a, sharp triangular spear points or daggers made from obsidian. These mata'a are found in great numbers in the later archaeological layers across the island, suggesting a significant increase in interpersonal violence and organized warfare. Further evidence comes from settlement patterns. People began to abandon the exposed coastal settlements and move inland, often to fortified caves or defensive hilltops. This shift in living arrangements points to a society where safety and security had become a primary concern. Skeletal remains from this period also provide grim testimony. A number of skeletons show evidence of trauma, including skull fractures consistent with blows from clubs or other weapons. Oral traditions, passed down and recorded by early European visitors, speak of warrior chiefs, battles between clans, and even cannibalism during extreme famine. While oral histories can be embellished, they align with archaeological evidence of social breakdown. The toppling of the Moai is another powerful symbol. Most statues were pulled down by the islanders themselves, likely a rejection of the old religion and the authority of rival chiefs. By the time the first Europeans arrived, not a single Moai was left standing on its platform. The society had not collapsed into nothingness, but it had been fundamentally and violently transformed. The internal struggles and environmental changes had already profoundly altered Rapa Nui society by the early 18th century. However, the arrival of outsiders delivered a series of devastating final blows from which the population would struggle to recover. The first documented European contact occurred on Easter Sunday in 1722, when a Dutch expedition led by Jacob Roggeveen landed on the island. Roggeveen described a largely treeless landscape and a population living in what appeared to be impoverished conditions. Yet the population still numbered in the thousands. This first encounter was followed by sporadic visits over the next century. These visits introduced something the islanders had no defense against: infectious diseases. Isolated for centuries, the Rapa Nui had no immunity. Smallpox, tuberculosis, syphilis. Each contact could trigger a deadly epidemic. An epidemic could sweep through the population, killing a significant portion. For Rapa Nui, it compounded existing hardships. The most catastrophic event, however, occurred in the 1860s. Peruvian and Spanish slave raiders descended on the island. Over several months in 1862, they abducted an estimated 1,500 people, nearly half the remaining population, including the paramount chief, his heir, and learned elders. They were taken to Peru as forced laborers to guano mines and plantations. The conditions were horrific. Most died from disease and abuse. Following international outcry, Peru repatriated a few dozen survivors. Tragically, the returning islanders brought a smallpox epidemic back with them. Smallpox ravaged the already diminished population. By 1877, disease and slavery had reduced the Rapa Nui to just 111 individuals. This was the true nadir, a demographic collapse caused not by internal conflict or ecological folly, but by the brutal actions of the outside world. Any narrative of Easter Island's collapse is incomplete without this devastating final chapter. The story of what happened on Easter Island is not a simple parable. It's about a society's interaction with its environment, its culture, and the outside world. The evidence clearly shows a collapse of the old, complex society did occur, but its causes were multiple and interconnected. It began with the islanders' own actions, clearing the palm forest for agriculture and the transport of Moai. This process was critically accelerated by the invasive Polynesian rat. The loss of the forest led directly to soil erosion. It also caused the loss of key resources for canoe building and fishing, and declining food security. These environmental pressures fueled social stress, leading to internal conflict, warfare, and the breakdown of the old religious and political order. The society did not vanish. It transformed into something different, smaller, less centralized, focused on survival in a harsher environment. Just as this new society was stabilizing, it was struck by European contact, introduced diseases, and, most horrifically, the slave raids of the 1860s. These external shocks, not internal failings, brought the Rapa Nui people to the brink of extinction. The final dramatic population crash was a consequence of global forces. If there's one clear lesson from Rapa Nui's pre-contact history, it's the danger of failing to recognize long-term consequences of short-term resource use. Yet the story of Rapa Nui is not only a warning, it is a profound testament to human resilience. From a low point of just 111 people, the Rapa Nui have survived. Today, their descendants number in the thousands. They are engaged in a vibrant cultural revival, preserving their language, traditions, and sacred sites, and are partners in the science that uncovered their true history. The Moai, once toppled, are now being raised again, not as idols of competing clans, but as proud symbols of a unique heritage and an enduring spirit. Rapa Nui's ultimate lesson may be one of hope, that even after the darkest times, recovery and renewal are possible.